Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to step into a moment that feels like it's still happening right now. The sunlight filters across the dining table, soft at first, touching the plates, the glasses, the steam rising from bowls of food I'd prepared with my own hands. Outside, the air is calm. A neighbor's dog barks faintly in the distance. For a second, life seems ordinary. But then, it breaks. Her voice. Sharp. Final. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, looks across the table at me, and without trembling, without hesitation, she says, "I hate you." The sound doesn't echo in the room. It echoes in me. My fork stops halfway to my mouth, suspended in midair as if even gravity refuses to move until I understand what just happened. The others sitting nearby grow quiet. The clink of silverware fades. The world shrinks to one sentence, one wound. I thought I was prepared for many things in life. I thought I knew what heartbreak was. I thought betrayal belonged to business deals, friendships, maybe even love. But betrayal from your own child? That is a different kind of cruelty. It doesn't just pierce the heart, it buries you alive, while you're still breathing, still reaching for the person you thought you knew. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Because the story I'm about to tell is not soft. It's not one of those tales where a happy ending waits to rescue us. No, this is about what it means to raise someone, to pour your life into them, only to one day become the enemy they define themselves against. And I want to know, from you who are listening right now, where are you watching from? What time of day is it for you? Because stories like this, they don't live only in my house. They live in countless kitchens, dining rooms, living rooms, hidden behind smiles when neighbors pass by, behind polite conversations at family gatherings. This pain, it is not just mine. It belongs to more of us than we dare admit. I sat there, staring at her. Her eyes didn't waver. They were steady, like she had rehearsed this moment, like she had waited for the perfect stage to deliver the line that would undo me. I remember the taste of food turning to ash in my mouth. I remember the way my chest tightened, not just from the words, but from the realization that there was no taking them back. And yet, even as my world collapsed in that instant, I smiled faintly. Out of instinct, out of survival, out of the old belief that if a parent shows strength, maybe the house won't fall apart completely. But deep inside, I felt the earth shift. I felt myself standing at the edge of a story that would not save me. This is where it begins. Not with laughter, not with celebration, but with a sentence that shattered the Sunday air. A sentence that will replay itself in my head long after the table is cleared, long after the house grows silent again. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping storms or enduring hunger. Sometimes survival is sitting through a meal where the person you gave your life to looks you in the eyes and chooses to bury you with words. There is a strange cruelty in memory. It does not always protect us from pain. Sometimes it makes it worse. When I heard her say she hated me, my mind did not leap forward to imagine what would come next. Instead, it leapt backward, into years I thought were safe, into the sound of a baby's first cry, into the warmth of a small hand clutching mine, into laughter that once filled this same house with so much joy I believed it could never leave. I remember the first time I saw her eyes open. The way she looked at me, unknowing yet trusting, as if my face were the only anchor in a world too bright, too loud. That gaze changed me. I had thought I understood responsibility. Bills, work, survival. That was responsibility. But the moment her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I realized responsibility was something else entirely. It was a vow without words, a vow to never let go. Her laughter was like a spell. I still hear it sometimes, when the house is empty, when silence presses too heavily against me. That sound could light up entire rooms. She used to crawl toward me on the carpet, unsteady, clumsy, determined. And when she finally stood on her own, wobbling, arms reaching out for balance, she did not fall into anyone's arms but mine. That memory was supposed to be permanent, eternal, a reminder that love is stronger than gravity. And yet, here I am, remembering those moments with a bitterness I never expected. Because those same arms, which once reached for me in trust, now cross in defiance. Those same eyes, once wide with wonder, now narrow in judgment. And that laughter, once my favorite sound in the world, has been replaced with words sharper than any blade. Still, I can't erase what came before. I don't want to. Even now, when she says she hates me, some part of me clings desperately to those echoes of innocence. They whisper to me at night, reminding me of the daughter I once had, of the bond I thought nothing could break. I remember her first day of school. She clutched my hand so tightly that morning, terrified of the crowd of children she didn't know. Her little backpack seemed almost bigger than her body. I bent down, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and promised her that she would be okay. She looked at me, eyes wide, and nodded with a bravery I knew was borrowed from my words. Later that afternoon, when I returned to pick her up, she ran into my arms with a joy so pure I nearly wept in the schoolyard. I remember the nights when she couldn't sleep, when monsters seemed to live in the shadows of her room. I sat beside her bed, telling her stories until her breathing grew slow and steady. Sometimes I'd stay long after she had fallen asleep, just watching her, just marveling at the miracle of a life I had been entrusted with. For years it was like that, our bond unshakable, or so I believed. Family photos on the mantelpiece show us smiling, arms around each other, eyes filled with affection. Birthdays with frosting smeared on cheeks. Vacations with sand between our toes. Ordinary days transformed into treasures simply because we had each other. And maybe that's why the pain cuts so deep now. Because when you've known the warmth of such love, its absence feels like frostbite. People tell me children change. They tell me adolescence is a battlefield, that words spoken in anger are not always meant. But when I replay that Sunday lunch in my head, I can't dismiss it so easily. Because hatred, once spoken aloud, has weight. And when it comes from someone who once looked at you as their entire world, it can feel like the closing of a door you'll never open again. It makes me wonder, was I blind? Did I miss the signs of distance forming long ago? Or is it possible that love is never as permanent as we wish it to be? That the bond between parent and child is not unbreakable, but fragile, breakable in ways we don't want to admit? Sometimes I sit in her old room, the posters on the walls, the books on the shelves, the stuffed animals lined neatly by the window. They all testify to a version of her that no longer exists. I trace my hand across her desk, remembering the nights I stayed up with her, helping with homework, encouraging her when she felt she wasn't smart enough. She used to look at me with gratitude then. She used to believe me when I told her she could do anything. Now she looks at me as though I am the obstacle, the wall she must climb over, the weight holding her down. It is a strange contradiction. I mourn her even as she sits in the next room. I grieve a daughter who is still alive, still breathing, still part of my home. And yet, the girl I remember, the one who clung to my hand, who laughed until she couldn't breathe, who whispered, "I love you," at bedtime, that girl is gone. And this is the cruelest part of all. You cannot unlove your child. No matter what they say, no matter how deeply they wound you, some part of you remains bound to them. That love, once planted, refuses to die. It grows in the cracks of your pain, stubborn, relentless, refusing to yield even when it is trampled. So I carry both. The hatred of her present words, the tenderness of her past laughter. The two live inside me, fighting each other, tearing me apart. But for now, in this part of the story, I let the memories have their turn. I let them rise like ghosts in my mind, haunting me with images of innocence and trust. Because if I don't hold on to them, even as they hurt me, then I lose her completely. And I'm not ready to let go. Not yet. Distance does not always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like water leaking into the foundation of a house. At first, you don't notice. At first, you tell yourself everything is fine. But one day you wake up, and the walls you thought were solid have already begun to crack. That's how it happened with my daughter. I can't pinpoint the exact moment it began. Maybe it was the slammed doors during her teenage years. Maybe it was the way she started answering questions with a single word, or sometimes not at all. Maybe it was the way her smile became rarer, as though every gesture of affection cost her something she no longer wanted to spend. In the beginning, I brushed it off. Everyone told me it was normal. "She's just growing up," they said. "Teenagers need their space. Don't take it personally." So I tried not to. I told myself silence wasn't rejection. I told myself distance wasn't hatred. I told myself this was just a phase. But deep inside, I felt the shift. The house grew quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that hums with tension, the kind where every word feels like it could set off a storm. Meals became shorter, eaten with eyes glued to phones or the TV, as if avoiding conversation were easier than confronting whatever had built up between us. I remember one evening when I asked her about her day at school. Just a simple question. She looked at me, sighed, and said, "Why do you always have to ask?" It was such a small thing, but in that moment, I felt something crumble. Because I wasn't prying, I was reaching, and she saw my hand not as a bridge, but as an intrusion. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, I stopped asking. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to share. So I convinced myself that giving her space was love too. But love that withdraws too often starts to look a lot like absence. The distance showed itself in small rituals. She no longer wanted to watch movies together. She no longer asked me to taste the meals she cooked. She no longer lingered in the kitchen just to chat. The laughter that once filled the house became something I had to chase in my memories. And yet, I kept hoping. Every time she passed by, I looked for a smile. Every time she came home late, I waited for a thank you, a good night, even a nod. But those small tokens grew rarer and rarer, until the waiting itself became its own kind of suffering. I wondered if this was my fault. Had I been too strict, too protective, too absent when she needed me? Parents are never given a manual, only trial and error. And I feared I had erred in ways that couldn't be undone. There were arguments, of course, heated words over grades, chores, choices of friends. But it wasn't the arguments themselves that scarred me. It was the way she looked at me during them, with eyes that no longer saw a parent, but an opponent. That shift was harder to bear than any raised voice. Even when we weren't fighting, the silence was loud. I'd sit in the living room, hearing her footsteps upstairs, the music playing faintly behind her door. We were under the same roof, but we lived in different worlds. She had her secrets, her friends, her thoughts, and I was no longer invited in. There's a kind of grief in watching someone you love retreat from you, inch by inch. You keep reaching, hoping they'll turn back, but all you touch is air. And yet, I held on. I told myself the distance was temporary, that she would grow out of it, the way children grow out of shoes. I reminded myself of the little girl who once clung to my hand. I convinced myself she was still in there, hidden under layers of anger and pride. But with every slammed door, every cold stare, every meal eaten in silence, I felt that little girl slipping further away. Until one day, I realized I wasn't holding her anymore. I was holding a memory. And memories, no matter how precious, cannot hug you back. There is a cruelty to words that silence can never reach. Silence is heavy, yes, but it leaves room for hope. You can tell yourself that maybe the other person simply doesn't know how to speak. Maybe they're waiting for the right moment. Maybe they care but can't express it. Silence is absence, but absence can still be filled. Words, though, once spoken, they carve themselves into you. They don't vanish. They don't soften with time. They replay in your head like a broken record, every syllable etched into memory, with a blade too sharp to dull. When she said, "I hate you," at that Sunday lunch, it wasn't the first time her words had hurt me, but it was the first time they left me breathless, as though the air itself had abandoned me. I had survived many things in my life, setbacks, betrayals, losses I never thought I'd endure. But nothing had prepared me for hatred delivered by my own child. Because when someone you love says those 3 words, it doesn't sound like a declaration. It sounds like a sentence. I sat there, frozen, as the words hung in the air. They were not shouted. They weren't even said with passion. They were calm, steady, certain, and that certainty was what broke me. Anger can be forgiven, passion can be explained away, but certainty is immovable. I kept waiting for her to take it back, for her to laugh awkwardly and say she didn't mean it, for someone else at the table to interrupt, to change the subject, to save us all from drowning in the silence that followed. But no one did. Not her. Not the others. And so the words stayed, growing heavier with every second. People underestimate the power of words. They think bruises hurt more because they can be seen. But a bruise fades. A scar softens. Words, however, don't leave the body. They stay in the mind, resurfacing at night when you're trying to sleep, creeping into dreams, echoing in the most ordinary of moments. I began to notice that the words she chose, even before that Sunday, had been changing. The daughter who once said, "I love you," every night before bed, now rolled her eyes at the smallest request. The girl who once shouted, "Mom, look at me," when she learned something new, now muttered, "Leave me alone," as though my presence was poison. And I wondered, had I grown deaf to these signs? Had I dismissed them as phases, normal rebellions, harmless frustrations? Was this Sunday not an eruption, but simply the culmination of years of smaller cuts I refused to feel at the time? Because looking back, I see the pattern now. I see the way she learned to use language not as a bridge, but as a weapon. Every sigh, every sarcastic remark, every clipped response, it all built toward the day when she would finally unsheath the blade fully and pierce me with 3 words I can never forget. I tried to tell myself she didn't mean it, that teenagers lash out, that anger exaggerates feelings, but the more I replayed her tone, the more I realized she had chosen her words carefully. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment fury. It was deliberate, and deliberate words carry a different kind of weight. I find myself recalling all the times I've been cut by language in my life. Employers telling me I wasn't good enough, friends whispering betrayal behind my back, strangers throwing insults meant to humiliate. Those hurt, yes, but they came from people who were not bound to me. They were not family. But a child's words? They cut deeper because they're forged in intimacy. Who else knows the soft places, the vulnerable spots, better than the one you raised? Who else can strike so precisely, so fatally, with just a sentence? It is strange how a parent's instinct still clings even in those moments. As I sat there, wounded by her words, another part of me wanted to reach across the table, to hold her hand, to tell her I loved her anyway, to remind her of who she used to be, of who we once were together. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because love, in that moment, felt like a door slammed in my face. Later that night, lying in bed, I thought about the thousands of words we had shared over the years, the bedtime stories, the whispered encouragements, the inside jokes, the late-night talks. Were they all erased by a single sentence? Or do they still matter, even now, even buried under the rubble of her hatred? I want to believe they matter. I want to believe words of love are not erased by words of hate. But the truth is, the memory of love is always weaker than the sting of rejection. One insult can undo 100 compliments. One, "I hate you," can eclipse a lifetime of "I love you." And that is what frightens me most. Not that she said it once, but that I will hear it forever. Even if she apologizes, even if she takes it back, even if she comes running into my arms tomorrow and begs forgiveness, those words will remain. They will live inside me, like a shadow cast across every memory we ever made. That is the power of words. They can build homes. They can start wars. They can heal wounds. And they can bury you alive, with no dirt, no shovel, just syllables strung together in the wrong order, at the wrong time, from the wrong person. And so I carry her words with me. They echo when I wake. They echo when I eat. They echo when I sit alone in the quiet. I am haunted, not by what she did, but by what she said. Because sometimes it's not fists or abandonment or betrayal that destroys you. Sometimes it's just a sentence, and I will never stop hearing it. Blame has a way of finding the nearest mirror. When the words, "I hate you," left my daughter's lips, I didn't just hear her voice. I heard my own mistakes whispering back at me. Was it my fault? That question became a constant companion, following me from room to room, from day into night. It sat with me at the kitchen table. It followed me into the shower. It lingered at the edge of my bed when I tried to sleep. Because when your child turns on you, the world doesn't automatically blame them. It blames you. And perhaps worse than that, you blame yourself. I began to replay my life in fragments. Was I too strict when she was younger? I remember the times I told her no, when she begged for something. Ice cream before dinner, staying out late, clothes I couldn't afford. Did she store those denials like little stones in her pocket, collecting them until the weight became too much? Or maybe I wasn't strict enough. Maybe I let her walk away too easily, gave her too much freedom, too much trust. Maybe she needed firmer boundaries, and my softness became neglect disguised as love. I wondered if I was absent in ways I didn't realize. I worked long hours. I chased bills and deadlines because I thought security was love. I thought putting food on the table and keeping a roof over her head was enough to prove I cared. But what if all she saw was absence? What if all she felt was distance? Parenthood is filled with contradictions like that. You sacrifice so much and still feel like you didn't give enough. You give your best and still wonder if your best was wrong. There were nights I sat in the dark, staring at family photos. In those frozen smiles, I looked like a good parent. She looked like a happy child. But what did those photos really prove? Were they just snapshots of performance, masks we wore for the camera, disguising the cracks that were already forming? The truth is, self-blame is addictive. It gives you the illusion of control. If it's my fault, then maybe I can fix it. If I caused her hatred, then perhaps I can undo it. But that hope is fragile, and it cuts both ways. Because if the fault is mine, then the punishment is endless. There is no redemption, only an infinite loop of regret. I remembered the times I raised my voice. I remembered the times I dismissed her feelings, thinking they were small or temporary. I remembered the moments when I chose work, exhaustion, or silence over listening. Each memory became evidence against me, a prosecutor's file I couldn't burn. Did I ever make her feel unseen? Did I ever make her feel unloved? The questions stabbed at me, relentless. Because as much as I wanted to believe her cruelty was unjustified, some part of me feared that hatred is not born in a vacuum. Maybe I had planted the seed without even knowing it. The human mind is cruel like that. It doesn't let you stand innocent for long. It forces you to revisit every choice, every sentence, every raised eyebrow, every slammed door. And in that mirror of blame, you don't see the love you gave, the sacrifices you made. You see only the failures, magnified until they blot out everything else. I tried talking to friends, to family. Some told me I was overthinking it. Kids say things they don't mean, they said. Others were harsher. Well, maybe she feels that way for a reason. Their words didn't comfort me. They fed the storm already raging inside. But what hurt most wasn't what others said. It was what I told myself. I told myself I was a bad parent. I told myself I had failed at the one role that mattered more than any other. I told myself she hated me because I deserved it. And yet, there was another voice inside me, faint but insistent. A voice that reminded me of the nights I stayed awake when she was sick, the birthdays I worked overtime to afford, the dreams I put on hold so she could chase hers. That voice told me I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't a monster either. Still, perfection and monstrosity don't matter in the face of rejection, because when your child says they hate you, they're not grading your efforts on a scale. They're handing you a verdict. I began to think of myself as both prisoner and judge. I was locked inside guilt, but I was also the one sentencing myself. Every memory was evidence, every doubt was a punishment. I wondered if other parents felt this too, if they ever lay awake at night, asking themselves how love could rot, how devotion could turn to disdain. The mirror of blame is merciless. It shows you not only who you are, but who you fear you might be. And once you start looking, it's hard to look away. But even in that endless self-interrogation, I kept circling back to one truth. I loved her. Imperfectly, clumsily, sometimes with mistakes, but I loved her. And if love counts for anything, then maybe I'm not as guilty as I believe. Yet guilt does not loosen easily. It clings to you, heavier than chains, whispering that you are responsible for every fracture, every wound. It tells you that you could have done more, should have done more, must have done more. And maybe that's what being a parent really is. Not just raising a child, but carrying their pain, even when it isn't yours to carry. Even when it buries you alive. Pain feels heavier when it is witnessed. It's one thing to carry sorrow inside your home, behind closed doors where no one else can see. But when outsiders notice, when they tilt their heads, lower their voices, and whisper about you, the burden doubles. After that Sunday lunch, I thought the wound would remain private. I thought those words, "I hate you," would echo only within the walls of my house. But pain has a way of leaking out, slipping into conversations, shaping how others see you. And soon, I realized I was not just a parent rejected by a child. I was a spectacle. Relatives were the first to notice. Family gatherings became tense, suffocating things. My daughter sat apart from me, her arms crossed, her words clipped. She made no effort to hide the coldness between us, and others noticed. They asked careful questions, their voices drenched in false concern. "Is everything all right between you two?" I smiled, the way people do when they're trying to hide a broken bone. I said things like, "Oh, you know, teenagers," or "She's just independent." But behind those smiles, I felt the sting of judgment. Their eyes told me they weren't convinced. They saw failure. They saw a parent who had somehow lost control. It didn't help that my daughter had her own way of telling the story. Not directly, not openly, but through sighs, eye rolls, and selective details slipped into conversations. I could hear it in the way she spoke to aunts, cousins, family friends, subtle digs, complaints delivered like confessions. She was crafting a narrative where I was the villain and she was the misunderstood heroine. And people listened. They believed her. Neighbors, too, began to notice. The walls of a house are thinner than we like to think. Voices carry, doors slam, and once whispers spread beyond the front yard, they rarely come back. I could feel it in the way neighbors greeted me, polite but distant, as though they knew something shameful about my home. As though my own child's rejection had become a stain I could not wash out. Even friends, those who had once cheered for me, celebrated milestones with me, began to look at me differently. Some offered advice I didn't ask for. "You need to be stricter. You need to give her more space. You need to talk to her, really talk." Each word felt like salt on an open wound. Advice assumes the problem has a solution, but sometimes love fails no matter how hard you try. The hardest part wasn't their judgment. It was their pity. I could see it in their eyes, the way they softened their voices when speaking to me, the way they hesitated before bringing up their own children. They pitied me. And pity is a lonely place. It separates you, makes you other, reminds you that what you're experiencing is not just painful, it's shameful. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped attending certain gatherings. It was easier to avoid the questions, the stares, the unspoken comparisons. Easier to retreat into my own silence than to stand under the gaze of people who thought they understood. And yet, part of me envied them. The relatives with laughing children, the friends who bragged about their kids' achievements, the neighbors whose homes seemed filled with harmony. I wondered if it was all real, or if their smiles hid fractures too. Maybe every family has its secrets. Maybe every parent has moments of rejection they bury beneath photographs and polite words. But whether theirs were real or not didn't matter. In my eyes, they had what I had lost. Sometimes, gossip reached me directly. A well-meaning neighbor once pulled me aside and said, "I heard she talks about you a lot. She sounds angry." She meant it as concern, but it cut me deeply. My private wounds were now public currency. My daughter's resentment had become a story told outside my walls, and I had no control over how it was told. And there lies another cruelty. When your child rejects you, they don't just hurt you, they redefine you. To others, you are no longer simply a parent. You are the parent who failed. You are the warning whispered at dinner tables. You are the example of what can go wrong." It weighed on me more than I wanted to admit. I began to question myself not only through my daughter's eyes, but through the eyes of everyone around me. Every look, every comment, every silence became evidence of my inadequacy. I tried, once, to confide in a close friend. I told her a little about what was happening, how lost I felt. She listened, but when she spoke, her words were gentle daggers. "Maybe you should try harder. Maybe she just needs more love." More love? I wanted to scream. What more love could I possibly give? I had already poured my life into her, and still it wasn't enough. So I withdrew. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending myself. I let the whispers swirl, the judgments pile up, the pity grow heavier. Because at some point, you realize that outsiders, family, friends, neighbors, cannot understand the storm inside your home. And worse, they don't really want to. They want a version of your story that fits neatly into their world. They want to believe rejection has a cause, a fix, a moral. Because if it doesn't, if love can fail for no clear reason, then it could happen to them too. And that is a truth too terrifying for most people to face. So I carry the weight quietly, even as outsiders shape their own versions of my pain. I let them believe what they want, because defending myself only deepens the wound. I let them pity me, because fighting pity is like trying to hold back the tide. But in the quiet of my own thoughts, I know the truth. My daughter's rejection isn't just between us. It has spilled into the world, into the eyes and voices of everyone around me. It has turned me into a story whispered at tables I no longer sit at, and perhaps that is what hurts most. Not just losing her, but losing myself in the eyes of others. A house remembers. The walls hold echoes, the floors carry vibrations, the furniture keeps silent watch. And once, this house of mine remembered laughter. It remembered the pounding of little feet racing down the hallway, the squeals of hide and seek, the sing-song voices at bedtime. For years, the house itself seemed to breathe with us, alive, warm, welcoming, but not anymore. After that Sunday lunch, after those words that cut deeper than I ever thought words could, the house changed. Or maybe it had been changing for years, and I only realized it then. The air became heavier, the rooms colder, as if the house had chosen sides. Meals, once the centerpiece of our togetherness, turned into silent negotiations. Plates were set, food was served, but no one lingered anymore. Forks clinked, spoons scraped, and the sound of chewing filled the spaces where conversation used to live. Sometimes the silence was worse than arguments. It was sharper, more deliberate, like an invisible wall between us. I remember sitting at the table one evening, watching her push food around her plate without eating. I asked gently, "Do you not like it?" She didn't answer. She just kept scraping, eyes fixed on the plate. The sound of metal against porcelain rang louder than any reply. And when she finally did speak, it was just one word, "Fine." That word, clipped and cold, carried more distance than miles ever could. Every room in the house became a test of endurance. The living room, once our sanctuary for movies and games, turned into neutral ground, occupied but never shared. She'd sit at one end of the couch, headphones in, face lit by the glow of her phone. I'd sit at the other end, staring at the TV without watching. Two people in the same room, strangers beneath the same roof. Even the hallways felt hostile. Passing each other became an exercise in avoidance. Eyes down, steps quick, breaths held until the other person was gone. The very act of moving through the house had become a reminder of how divided it was. Her bedroom door became the sharpest symbol of all. Once, it had been a portal to shared moments. I used to knock softly, carrying hot chocolate or a plate of cookies, welcomed with a smile. Sometimes I'd be invited in just to sit on the edge of her bed and listen to her talk about school, friends, dreams. But now, the door was a barrier. It stayed closed. Locked even. A silent declaration that I was no longer welcome. I used to think doors were meant to protect. Now I realized they could also exclude. And every time I walked past that door, I felt like a guest in my own home. The house itself seemed to grow colder. Rooms that once felt warm now echoed with absence. Even the sunlight seemed to fall differently, slanting through windows in ways that emphasized the dust, the stillness. I caught myself cleaning more often, scrubbing counters, vacuuming floors, wiping surfaces, trying to restore order where no order could be found. It was as though I believed that if the house sparkled, maybe the cracks in our relationship would fade. But they didn't. Arguments erupted like thunderstorms, sudden and loud, leaving the house trembling afterward. Voices raised in the kitchen, footsteps storming down the hallway, doors slammed so hard the frames shook. And after the thunder passed, the silence that followed was worse. It wasn't relief. It was devastation. The kind of silence you hear after something precious has been broken. I realized, too, that the house had become a mirror of us. It was divided, not by walls, but by the space between two people who no longer knew how to speak to each other. She lived upstairs, in her fortress of music and screens. I lived downstairs, in the routines of survival, cooking, cleaning, pretending. We crossed paths, but we did not meet. Even the smallest rituals had become battlegrounds. Laundry left undone, dishes abandoned in the sink, lights left on in empty rooms. None of these things mattered on their own, but together they became symbols. Every undone task felt like defiance. Every slammed cabinet felt like a declaration of war. At night, lying in bed, I could hear her footsteps pacing in her room. I wondered if she ever listened to mine. I wondered if she lay awake too, haunted by the distance between us, or if she had already built a new life inside her mind, one where I didn't exist. It is a peculiar kind of grief, living in a house that remembers better days. Every corner whispers of what once was. The couch remembers her laughter. The kitchen remembers our conversations. The hallway remembers the sound of her running into my arms. And yet, all I hear now are echoes, hollow reminders of a bond that used to feel unbreakable. Some nights, I sit in the dark, in the middle of the living room, listening to the house. I imagine it mourning with me, carrying the weight of our silence in its beams and bricks. A house divided is not just a building. It is a reflection of the souls inside it. And mine feels split in two. I still cook her favorite meals, though she barely touches them. I still leave little notes sometimes, though they go unanswered. I still try, in small ways, to make the house feel like a home again. But each attempt feels like painting over cracks in the wall, cosmetic, temporary, doomed to fail. Because the truth is, you cannot make a house whole when the family inside it is broken. And so I live here, in these divided rooms, carrying the memory of laughter like a ghost, waiting for a warmth that may never return. There is no wound quite like the one inflicted by someone who knows exactly where you're vulnerable. Strangers can insult you, acquaintances can betray you, but only family can strike at the softest part of your soul, because they know where it lives. After that Sunday lunch, I thought perhaps things might cool with time. Maybe her words had been fueled by a moment of anger. Maybe they would dissolve into apologies, or at least uneasy truce. But instead, her hostility only sharpened. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was action. It was intention. It was war carried out in the quiet corners of the home. She began to test me. Not openly, not in ways that could be dismissed as coincidence. No, her actions felt deliberate, like little challenges designed to see how far she could push before I broke. The mornings became the first battlefield. She'd leave dishes in the sink, not just one or two, but piles. Plates with hardened food, glasses sticky with juice, utensils clumped together. It wasn't laziness, it was defiance, because she knew I'd clean them. She knew I'd sigh, roll up my sleeves, and do the work she refused to. And every time I did, she won a silent victory. Her words turned sharper too. No longer one-word answers, but daggers hidden in sentences. If I suggested she wear a jacket on a cold day, she'd snap back, "Why do you care? You only think about yourself anyway." If I asked about school, she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "You wouldn't understand." Small words, but chosen with precision, each one designed to slice away at my worth as a parent. She began avoiding me in obvious ways, coming home late, retreating upstairs immediately, skipping meals I'd spent hours preparing. The rejection wasn't subtle anymore. It was displayed openly, like a banner I was forced to look at every day. And then there were the looks. The eyes that once sparkled with laughter now carried disdain. She didn't need words to make me feel small. A glance across the table, a sneer as she walked past, was enough to reduce me. Sometimes I wondered if she practiced those looks in the mirror, perfecting the art of contempt. It was in these moments I realized something terrifying. I no longer felt safe in my own home. Not because she would harm me physically, but because her presence had become a constant reminder of rejection. I tiptoed around her moods the way one tiptoes around broken glass. Careful, hesitant, afraid of cutting oneself on the sharp edges of every interaction. And still, I tried. I kept trying, because that's what parents do. I left her favorite snacks in the pantry. I offered rides, asked questions, tried to engage. But each attempt was thrown back at me, twisted into proof of my supposed failures. If I reached out, I was accused of smothering her. If I gave space, I was accused of not caring. No matter what I did, the result was the same. I was wrong. It felt like living with an enemy who had once been my child. And that contradiction tore at me. How could someone I raised, someone I loved, someone whose scraped knees I bandaged and whose tears I wiped away, become the person who now seemed determined to wound me? I began to dread the sound of her footsteps. The slam of her door upstairs was like a drumbeat of defeat. Even the creak of floorboards made my stomach tighten, because I never knew what version of her I would face. The cold silence, the cutting remark, or the open hostility. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table long after she had gone to bed, my hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea, staring at nothing. I felt like a soldier stationed in enemy territory, counting the hours until the next attack. But unlike soldiers, I had no weapon, no armor, no strategy. I only had love, and love in this war felt useless. What made it worse was knowing she understood exactly how to hurt me. She knew my fears, she knew my weaknesses, and she used them. If I expressed sadness, she dismissed it as drama. If I asked for respect, she laughed and told me I didn't deserve it. Every plea I made became ammunition for her contempt. There is a saying, home should be the safest place, but mine had become a battlefield. The kitchen, the living room, even the quiet of my own bedroom, all of it carried the tension of war. I never knew when the next strike would come, and yet, despite it all, I couldn't stop loving her. That was the cruelest twist of all. No matter how many times she cut me down, no matter how sharp her words became, I still found myself hoping for change, hoping for a smile, a soft word, a sign of the daughter I once knew. And when small glimpses appeared, a faint thanks, a rare moment of softness, I clung to them like lifelines, even though I knew they would vanish again. Living with an enemy is exhausting. Living with an enemy who carries your blood, who shares your face in the mirror, who once clung to you in trust. That is devastation beyond words. I often wondered if she knew the power she held, if she realized that every cold glance, every cruel remark, every deliberate act of defiance was not just rebellion, but destruction. Maybe she did. Maybe that was the point, because the enemy within does not just fight you, they know you. They know how to strike without mercy, because they know you will never strike back. And that was me, a prisoner of my own love, bound to someone who used that love as a weapon. Memories were supposed to be my refuge. That's what I believed. When the present grew heavy, I thought I could lean on the past, on the snapshots of joy, on the laughter stored in photographs, on the milestones engraved in my mind. But what I learned is that memories can betray you. They can turn against you, twisting themselves into reminders not of what you had, but of what you've lost. Everywhere I looked, my house was crowded with ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or drift through walls, but the kind that smile from picture frames, the kind that cling to objects left behind, the kind that whisper in the silence of empty rooms. The refrigerator door, for example, covered in magnets holding up old drawings, stick figures of me and her, drawn in crayon, both of us smiling under a bright yellow sun. Once, I looked at those drawings with pride. Now, they mocked me. The child who drew them no longer existed. She had grown into someone who looked at me with contempt, and yet the refrigerator still carried her promises of love. Her old toys, tucked away in boxes in the attic, carried the same betrayal. A stuffed bear with worn fur, its ear half chewed from when she was teething. Plastic figurines she used to line up on the floor, creating elaborate worlds I was always invited to join. Those objects were supposed to hold sweetness, but now they felt like accusations. They seemed to say, "You once mattered to her. What happened to you?" Even the walls remembered. There are faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorway, recording her height as she grew. Each line was a celebration, another inch, another year, another proof of life blossoming. I used to trace those lines with my finger, marveling at how quickly time passed. Now, when I run my hand over them, all I feel is distance. She kept growing, but the bond between us shrank. Birthdays are the cruelest memories of all. I can still hear the sound of candles being blown out, the cheering, the off-key singing. I can still taste the frosting on my finger after sneaking a piece of cake when she wasn't looking. I can still see the way her eyes lit up when she unwrapped gifts. Back then, I thought each celebration was proof of our unbreakable bond. Now, when I look at those photos, all I see is naivety. My belief that love, once given, could never vanish. Even the seasons carry betrayal. Autumn leaves remind me of the times we went walking together, her small boots crunching the ground, her hand slipping into mine. Winter brings memories of hot chocolate by the fire, of scarves wrapped tight around her neck before she ran out to play in the snow. Spring remembers her laughter as she chased butterflies in the garden. Summer recalls her squeals in the pool, water sparkling around her. Each season used to bring anticipation. Now they bring grief. I've come to realize that betrayal doesn't always come in the form of a person. Sometimes betrayal lives in the way memories refuse to fade. They show you what you lost, over and over, until the beauty itself becomes unbearable. There was one evening I made the mistake of opening an old photo album. At first, I thought it would comfort me. I thought revisiting the past would remind me that underneath the anger, underneath the rejection, there was still love. But as I turned each page, the opposite happened. I saw her face as a child, smiling at me with unguarded joy, and I felt my chest tighten until I could hardly breathe, because the girl in those pictures was gone. She had been replaced by someone who now looked at me as though I were the enemy. The betrayal of memory lies in this. It does not change with the present. Photographs keep smiling even when the person in them no longer does. Toys remain innocent even when their owner has grown bitter. Drawings of love remain taped to the refrigerator even when the artist now spits out words of hate. Sometimes I want to throw it all away. Burn the drawings, pack up the photos, erase the marks on the doorway. Maybe then the house would feel less cruel, less full of echoes that mock me. But I can't. Because as much as they hurt me, they are also all I have left of the child I once knew. To destroy them would be to lose her entirely, so I live surrounded by ghosts. I walk through rooms that carry both comfort and torment. I touch objects that sting my hands like thorns. I sit on the couch where she once curled up beside me, only to feel the emptiness of the space where she now refuses to sit. This is the paradox of memory. It gives and it takes. It heals and it wounds. It comforts and it betrays. And I am trapped between both sides, longing for the warmth of the past, yet crushed by the weight of what those memories reveal about the present. When I close my eyes at night, I don't just dream of her childhood. I dream of the way she used to look at me, the way her arms used to reach for me. I dream of the word love spoken in her small voice, innocent and pure. And when I wake, the silence of the house feels colder than ever, because the dream fades, but the absence remains. And so, memories that once felt like treasures have become daggers, each one reminding me of the daughter who buried me alive long before my body will ever leave this world. Silence can be protective. It can shield you from conflict, hide your wounds from the eyes of those who would only pity you, and allow you to maintain dignity when your world is crumbling. But silence can also become a burden so heavy it crushes you from the inside out. After my daughter's words, "I hate you," echoed across that Sunday table, I didn't tell anyone the truth. Not really. I didn't sit with friends and confess, "My child despises me." I didn't call family members to explain what had happened. I carried it alone. Because how do you say such a thing out loud without shattering yourself even further? Admitting it would have meant making it real. So instead, I smiled in conversations. When people asked, "How are things at home?" I gave vague answers. "Oh, kids grow up so fast," or "We're managing." Those phrases became masks I wore, disguises that allowed me to pass through the world without revealing the rot beneath the surface. But behind the masks, silence grew heavier. Every unspoken word pressed down on my chest. Every hidden truth hollowed me out a little more. I began to feel like I was living a double life. The one others saw, where everything appeared normal, and the one inside my head, where I was drowning in rejection. There were moments I longed to tell someone, to sit across from a trusted friend and confess everything, to cry openly without shame, to let the words spill out. She said she hates me. My daughter hates me. But each time I tried, the words froze in my throat. Because saying them would invite questions I couldn't answer. It would invite judgment I couldn't bear. And worst of all, it would expose me as a failure. Because isn't that what society tells us? That a good parent is loved by their children. That devotion, sacrifice, endless care will always be repaid with affection. If a child turns away, the blame falls on the parent. That belief lives deep in all of us, and it silenced me. I could imagine the responses. What did you do to make her feel that way? Were you too harsh? Did you neglect her? Even if those questions weren't spoken, I knew they would hang in the air. And so I said nothing. The silence began to change me. It made me smaller. I stopped talking about my daughter in public, stopped sharing stories about her the way I once had. Other parents would laugh about their children's antics, and I would force a smile, nodding along, pretending I had something similar to share. Inside, though, I felt like an imposter, a parent stripped of joy. At night, the silence was worse. Lying awake, I thought of all the things I wanted to say to her, all the apologies I wanted to offer, all the questions I wanted to ask. But my lips stayed sealed, even when she was only a room away. The house was full of words unsaid, and they piled up like stones, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. Sometimes I wondered if she felt the same weight, if her silence also carried a burden, or if it was light for her, an escape, a way of punishing me without having to lift a hand. Maybe her silence gave her freedom, while mine chained me. I noticed how silence began to shape our interactions. We stopped talking about anything beyond the surface. "Dinner's ready. I'm going out. Good night." Functional words, empty of emotion. Every conversation avoided the truth lurking beneath, and in avoiding it, we built walls higher and higher. There is a kind of prison that doesn't have bars. Mine was made of silence. Each day, I felt more trapped in it. And the cruel part is, I was both prisoner and guard. I kept myself locked inside, afraid of what would happen if I tried to break free. I used to believe that speaking the truth could heal, that if I opened my mouth and poured out the pain, it would lessen. But when I pictured the words leaving me, I felt exposed, naked, judged. So I stayed quiet. I carried the burden like a secret illness, invisible to the outside world, but eating me alive inside. Even when relatives noticed the tension, I brushed it off. When friends hinted at her coldness, I changed the subject. I let silence protect her image, even as she shredded mine. Because some part of me still wanted to shield her. From others, from judgment, from the consequences of her cruelty. That instinct never leaves a parent, even when the child has turned into the enemy. And yet, the cost of silence grew unbearable. My body carried it. My shoulders slumped beneath its weight. My chest ached with words unsaid. My nights stretched longer, my days shorter, each one colored by the things I refused to admit out loud. People think silence is nothing. But silence is something. It is a presence, heavy and unrelenting. It is a constant reminder of what cannot be spoken, what must be carried alone. I often imagined what it would feel like to break it. To stand in front of someone I trusted and say, "My daughter hates me." To let the words exist outside my own head. To release them into the world, no matter what came back at me. But I never did. Because once spoken, the truth could never be taken back. And so I kept carrying it. Day after day. Night after night. Silence, my prison. Silence, my punishment. Silence, my only way of surviving a story too shameful to tell. Hope is a strange thing. It doesn't need to be large, or loud, or even logical. Sometimes it comes as small as a whisper, as fragile as a candle flame trembling against the wind. And even when everything else tells you to give up, that fragile light can keep you alive. After months of silence, after countless cold looks and sharper words than I thought a child could throw at a parent, I began to notice something unexpected. Tiny moments when her armor cracked. Brief, fleeting, almost imperceptible, but real. One evening, I left dinner on the table as always. I didn't expect her to thank me. She rarely did anymore. But when I returned to the kitchen later, I saw her plate was clean. And next to the sink, she had rinsed it. Just rinsed, not washed. But that single gesture made my chest ache. Because it wasn't nothing, it was something. Another time, I sneezed in the hallway. From behind her closed bedroom door, I heard her voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Bless you." Just 2 words. Ordinary, casual, but they landed in me like a lifeline. Proof that some part of her still saw me, still acknowledged my existence beyond hostility. And then there was the night when my back hurt so badly I couldn't hide the grimace on my face. I thought she'd ignore me, but instead, she asked, quietly, almost reluctantly, "Are you okay?" I told her yes, brushing it off. But inside, my heart surged, because in that moment, she remembered. She remembered I was human. These small gestures did not erase the hurt. They did not undo the cruelty of her words or the coldness of her distance. But they were cracks in the wall she had built, and through those cracks, light seeped in. And I clung to that light as though it were the only thing keeping me from drowning. Parents are wired that way. We can endure years of pain for a single smile, a single kind word, a single act of recognition. We stretch hope beyond reason because the alternative, accepting total rejection, is unbearable. I began to treasure these flickers, storing them in my memory the way others store precious jewels. The rinsed plate, the muffled "bless you," the worried glance when I winced in pain. Each one replayed in my mind over and over, a counterweight to the countless slights and silences. But hope, like memory, can be cruel. Because each flicker raised questions I couldn't answer. Did they mean anything? Were they signs of a daughter still buried under the hostility, waiting to resurface? Or were they simply reflexes, meaningless gestures mistaken by a desperate parent as proof of love? Sometimes I thought I saw her hesitate before snapping at me. Her mouth would open, her eyes would flicker, and for a second, I thought she might say something kind instead. But the moment would pass, and the words would come sharp as ever. Still, I replayed those hesitations in my head, convincing myself they mattered. Other times, I thought I saw tenderness when she didn't know I was watching. The way she laughed with friends on the phone, the way her face softened when she scrolled through old photos, the way she lingered over a childhood toy she had once discarded. These glimpses reminded me that the child I knew wasn't gone completely, just buried. And so, I held on. It is strange how hope works when love is at stake. Logic tells you to protect yourself, to let go, to accept the loss. But the heart refuses. It clings to every flicker, magnifies every gesture, spins entire stories out of the smallest thread. Because if there is even the smallest chance, how can you turn away? Of course, the flickers were not enough to change the reality. The house was still cold, the silence still heavy, the hostility still sharp. But those tiny sparks kept me alive in a way nothing else could. They whispered, "Maybe it isn't over. Maybe love still breathes, even if faintly." One night, I dreamed of her as a child again. In the dream, she was 5 years old, running toward me with her arms wide open. I scooped her up, spinning her around, both of us laughing. When I woke, my cheeks were wet with tears. But strangely, I wasn't crushed. Because even in the dream, I felt that flicker. That reminder that somewhere, somehow, love had existed. And if it existed once, maybe it could exist again. Hope can be foolish. It can keep you chained to pain longer than you should bear. But it can also be the only thing that keeps you breathing. And in my darkest nights, I chose to believe that every small gesture meant something. That beneath the anger, beneath the distance, beneath even those words that cut like knives, my daughter still carried a piece of love for me. Because without that belief, I don't know how I would have survived. Every story has a breaking point, a moment where the weight becomes too much, where the cracks in the walls no longer just spread silently, but split the entire structure apart. For me, that moment came not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a quiet exchange that stripped away the last of my illusions. It was an ordinary evening. I had cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and bread, the kind of meal I thought she still liked. I called her down, my voice steady, even hopeful. She came, reluctantly, dragging her feet, her eyes glued to her phone. She sat across from me, barely glancing at the plate I had set before her. We ate in silence for a while. I watched her, searching for some sign of connection, some flicker of warmth. But she stayed closed off, as if the table itself were a border we could not cross. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask the question that had haunted me for months. "Do you hate me?" The words slipped out softer than I intended, almost a whisper. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. She kept twirling her fork in the pasta, her face unreadable. Then she set the fork down, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "Yes." Just that. One word. Not shouted, not cruel, just certain. I had been bracing for denial, for a laugh, for her to tell me I was overreacting, for her to say no, even if it was a lie. But instead, she confirmed it. And in that instant, everything inside me collapsed. There was no anger in her voice, which made it worse. Anger can fade, anger can burn out. But certainty? Certainty is permanent. She wasn't lashing out. She wasn't exaggerating. She meant it. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my hands trembling under the table where she couldn't see. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. The day she was born, the times she fell asleep on my chest, the way she once whispered, "I love you," before bed. All of it, erased by a single word. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, "You don't mean that," or "You'll regret it someday." But the truth was, I didn't believe my own defenses anymore. Deep down, I had always feared her hatred was real. Now I knew it. We finished the meal in silence. She ate calmly, as though nothing had been said, as though she hadn't just destroyed me with a single syllable. I chewed mechanically, tasting nothing, hearing only the echo of that word. Yes. Afterward, she left the table without looking back. Her footsteps up the stairs were steady, her door closing with the usual finality. I sat alone in the dining room, the plates still warm, the candle I had lit flickering faintly as if mocking me. That was my breaking point. It wasn't the first time she had hurt me, but it was the first time I stopped pretending things might change. The first time I stopped telling myself this was just a phase, that one day she would come back, that the daughter I raised still lived somewhere inside her. Number that night, I realized the truth. The bond was broken, maybe forever, and the despair that followed was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the sharp sting of rejection anymore. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of finality. It was grief, but worse, because grief at least carries closure. Death is final, but rejection lingers. It leaves you alive in a grave you cannot climb out of. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty plates, unable to move. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of endings, of something precious turning to ash. The breaking point doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with a whisper, a simple confirmation that what you fear most is true. And once it arrives, you are no longer the same. In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, working, but inside, I was hollow. I no longer looked for flickers of hope. I no longer waited for small gestures. I stopped checking her face for signs of love, because the answer had been given, clear and undeniable. Yes. That word replayed in my mind endlessly, carving deeper every time. It became the soundtrack of my life, the truth I carried like an invisible brand. I had reached the point where hope could no longer protect me. The house, once divided, now felt dead. Rooms were not battlefields anymore. They were tombs, filled with memories of a love that had been buried alive. And I was the mourner, wandering among them, unable to leave. The breaking point doesn't end the story, but it changes it. After that night, everything shifted. I was no longer a parent waiting for reconciliation. I was a parent living with the knowledge that reconciliation might never come, and that knowledge was heavier than any silence, sharper than any word, darker than any night. That was the moment I stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped pretending. The moment I understood that sometimes, no matter how much love you pour into someone, they will not return it. And that realization broke me more completely than her hatred ever could. Nights became the longest part of my life. Days, at least, had distractions. The noise of work, the clatter of dishes, the dull routine of survival. But when the sun went down and the house fell quiet, there was nothing to protect me from the weight pressing on my chest. The nights stretched endlessly, swallowing me whole. After the breaking point, the night she confirmed with certainty that she hated me, I stopped sleeping properly. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness above me thick and suffocating. The clock ticked softly on the nightstand, its steady rhythm mocking me. Each tick was another second lost to silence, another reminder that I was still awake, still alone, still carrying a wound that refused to close. My mind would not rest. It replayed everything, every moment of her childhood, every decision I had made as a parent, every word I had spoken. It was like watching an endless film reel, one that looped over and over, each scene sharper than the last. The laughter of her childhood clashed with the coldness of her present, and in the contrast, I tore myself apart. I remembered the way she used to curl into my lap, clutching a blanket, demanding just one more story before bed. I remembered the way she used to call me her hero, her safe place. And then, with a cruelty that only memory can conjure, I heard her voice again. The adult version, steady and unyielding. Yes. I hate you. The clash of then and now was unbearable. I tried to remind myself that time changes people, that growing up comes with rebellion, anger, distance. But that word, hate, is not rebellion. It is not a phase. It is a verdict. And no amount of excuses could soften it in my mind. So I lay there, night after night, interrogating myself. What did I do wrong? Was there a moment I could point to, a single choice that led us here? Did I fail her in ways I was too blind to see? Or was this something beyond me, a truth that would have unfolded no matter what I did? The questions never ended, and without answers, they grew heavier. Sometimes I would get out of bed, unable to lie still any longer, and wander the house in the dark. I'd move from room to room, letting my fingers trail across surfaces, touching the objects that carried our history. A book we once read together, a mug she once painted for me on Mother's Day, the marks on the doorway where I measured her growth. Each item became both comfort and torment, reminders that love had been here once and that it had vanished. The nights were not silent, not really. They were filled with echoes, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old floorboards, the distant sound of cars on the road outside. But louder than all of it was the echo inside me, the memory of her words, the certainty in her eyes. That was the noise that refused to fade. On the worst nights, I imagined different endings. I imagined her storming into my room, apologizing, breaking down into tears, telling me she didn't mean it. I imagined us hugging, both of us sobbing, both of us healing. Those fantasies brought me temporary relief, like cool water on a burn. But when I opened my eyes and saw only darkness, the relief curdled into despair. Because the apology never came. Sleep, when it finally arrived, was never kind. My dreams were filled with distorted versions of her. Sometimes she was a child again, laughing, running, calling my name, and I would wake with tears in my eyes, mourning her all over again. Other times, she was the cold version, staring at me with hatred, repeating those words like a chant until I jolted awake, heart pounding. Mourning never brought peace. It brought exhaustion. I rose with heavy limbs, my mind fogged, my spirit weary. But the cycle continued. I survived the day, and then the long night swallowed me again. I began to wonder if this was my punishment, not just her rejection, but the endless nights of replay and regret. A sentence without end, carried out in darkness. There's a saying, night is darkest before the dawn. But for me, dawn didn't bring hope. It brought another day of pretending, another day of silence, another day of living under the same roof with someone who despised me. The long nights taught me something I hadn't wanted to know. Grief doesn't only belong to death. You can grieve someone who is still alive, still walking past you, still eating at the same table. And that grief is crueler because there is no funeral, no closure, no ritual to mark the loss. There is only the endless night, stretching on, with no dawn bright enough to erase it. And so I endure them, one after another, nights without rest, nights filled with memories that comfort and betray, nights where silence becomes a scream inside my head. The long night is my new companion, and I don't know if I will ever escape it. Regret is a mirror you cannot turn away from. No matter how hard you try to avoid it, there it is, waiting, reflecting not just your face, but every mistake, every flaw, every moment you wish you could take back. After the breaking point, regret became my constant reflection. I saw it first thing in the morning. When I washed my face, my eyes looked back at me, tired, red, hollow. I no longer saw only the person I was. I saw the parent I should have been, the parent who could have done more, said less, held back, leaned in, chosen differently. Regret turned my own image into an accusation. Each wrinkle on my face reminded me of years gone by. Years I thought I had invested well. Years I thought I had filled with love. But now, in the mirror of regret, those years looked wasted. What good were bedtime stories, scraped knee bandages, and birthday cakes if they ended in hatred? What good was sacrifice if it bore only resentment? Regret doesn't just live in the past, it rewrites it. It takes every decision, every moment, and twists it into evidence against you. When she was little and I told her no to something she wanted, was that the seed? When I worked late to pay the bills, did she see absence instead of devotion? When I offered advice, did she hear criticism instead of care? The mirror never answered. It only reflected questions back at me, sharper every time. Sometimes I tried to argue with it. I told myself I had done my best, that no parent is perfect, that children grow and make their own choices. But the mirror was relentless. It showed me her face instead, her eyes filled with disdain, her voice steady and cold as she said she hated me. If I had done better, would she have said it? If I had been different, would we still be close? The mirror of regret is cruel because it has no mercy. It doesn't care about circumstances, sacrifices, or intentions. It only shows you the outcome. And in my case, the outcome was a daughter who despised me. I began to avoid mirrors, not just the glass ones in the bathroom or the hallway, but any reflective surface, windows at night, polished tabletops, even the gleam of silverware. Because wherever I looked, I didn't see myself anymore. I saw failure. I saw regret. Yet, as much as I tried to run, I couldn't escape it. Regret doesn't live in the glass. It lives inside you. The mirror is just a reminder of what you already carry in your bones. I thought back often to the crossroads of our life together, wondering which turn I had taken wrong. Was it when I tried to protect her too much, or not enough? Was it when I held on too tightly, or when I let go too soon? The questions circled endlessly, each one tightening the rope of guilt around my throat. The cruelest part of regret is that it has no end. You can't fix the past. You can't relive the moments. You can only replay them, knowing they are permanent. And so, you trap yourself in a cycle of what-ifs, building prisons out of choices that can never be undone. There were moments I tried to forgive myself. I whispered, "You did the best you could. You loved her. That should be enough." But the mirror never let me believe it, because love, in the end, had not been enough. And so, regret stared back at me, cold and unflinching. I began to notice how regret shaped my body. My shoulders curved forward, as though trying to fold in on themselves. My eyes avoided contact, afraid of being seen for what I carried. Even my hands trembled more, as if the weight of holding memories and mistakes had finally become too much. Regret is heavy. It doesn't sit quietly in the corner. It climbs onto your back, presses into your chest, whispers into your ear. It steals your present by chaining you to the past. And it makes you believe that you are unworthy of forgiveness, even from yourself. There were nights I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have, staring into my own eyes, searching for something, anything that could absolve me. But all I found was a reflection I could not escape. The mirror of regret had become my truest companion, and like my daughter's hatred, it left me with no choice but to face it every single day. The house is quiet now, quieter than it has ever been. Even the walls seem to breathe slower, as if they too have grown tired of carrying echoes. I move through the rooms softly, my steps careful, almost reverent. Each space holds its memories, its shadows, its fragments of laughter now long gone. I don't chase them anymore. I let them float around me, gentle and untouchable, like dust caught in the afternoon sun. The nights are still long, but they no longer terrify me the way they once did. I've grown used to the silence. It has become a companion, not an enemy. A strange sort of comfort, cold but steady. I sit with it, I breathe with it, I let it fill the spaces words cannot. My daughter lives her life, separate from mine. I don't expect reconciliation anymore. I don't expect apologies, or sudden revelations, or miracles that will stitch us back together. Love, when it is broken, does not always heal. Sometimes it remains shattered, and you learn to live carefully among the shards. But even in that brokenness, there is a kind of peace. A peace that comes not from fixing, but from accepting. From loosening the grip on what was lost, and allowing yourself to simply exist with what remains. I no longer fight against the past. I no longer punish myself with mirrors. Instead, I let the memories drift like leaves on water. There, then gone, beautiful and untouchable. And when I close my eyes at night, I don't pray for her love anymore. I only hope she is safe, that she laughs sometimes, that she feels joy, even if it is not with me. That perhaps is the final act of love, wishing happiness for someone, even when they have buried you alive. So I sit here, in this quiet house, the evening light stretching long shadows across the floor. The world outside carries on. Neighbors walking dogs, children playing, life unfolding in all its noise. Inside, I remain still, watching, breathing, remembering. And as the light fades into darkness, I let myself whisper a goodbye. Not a bitter one, not a sharp one, but a soft, fading goodbye, carried on the air like a secret no one else will ever hear. Goodbye to the girl I raised. Goodbye to the bond we once had. Goodbye to the version of myself who thought love could fix everything. The night gathers gently around me, and I allow myself to rest. Thank you for reading the whole story. Hope you will support my next products.